Are we? There's 7 chairs. Are we that many? We're not that many. No, we are. Wow, that's a lot of people on stage. Hi, everyone, or hi back. I think we have a crazy, amazingly diverse group of people from very different backgrounds with very different experiences, doing projects in VR and experimental storytelling, sometimes for a while and sometimes just new in it. So I'm looking forward to, basically this is just me asking people I'm fascinated with questions. And I hope you like the same questions. But I want to start by just having everyone give them a small introduction, who they are, and maybe the project they're doing, or kind of so that you get an idea of their background, from where they're coming from.
Sure. My name's Robert Stromberg, co-founder of VRC, film director, and VR enthusiast.
My name's Ted. I'm the futurist at 20th Century Fox, and a VR and future experience of cinema explorer, and big kid in a grown-up body.
I want your title, futurist. Sounds amazing.
Hi, I'm Ikrima El-Hassan. I'm a co-founder of Kite and Lightning with Corey Strasberger, and we make some cool VR experiences.
I'm Chris Milk. I'm a co-founder of Verse with Aaron Koblin, and we do a similar thing.
I also do similar things. My name is Félix Lajeunesse. I'm a co-founder of Felix and Paul Studios, and we do cinematic virtual reality experiences.
Cool. My name is Arthur Van Hoff. I'm the CTO and co-founder of Jaunt. We build tools and cameras and equipment and a whole pipeline for creating cinematic VR experiences, and our end product is hopefully a really exciting experience. So I'm similar to the rest of the team.
Cool. That is a very diverse background. Maybe Ted, you first, because you have the closest ties to old school Hollywood in your role. Because we all do this stuff because we love it, and you're kind of you're at the point where you intersect with the old school Hollywood. So I'm curious, what do they think? Like, are they scared of it? Do they not understand it? Do they like, what's the sense you get? Do they constantly try to figure out how do we monetize it?
I think there's actually a lot of very open-mindedness and a lot of enthusiasm now, at least around our studio, and I think actually around a lot of the studios. I think that certainly for 20th Century Fox and our group, that is this sort of ragtag team of risk takers and ask for forgiveness type folks, as opposed to ask for permission folks.
Yeah.
We built this sort of crazy lab that's called the VR bunker, and it's far less impressive when you go to it, and all these guys have been to it. What's actually also so interesting is that we all know each other really well. We all worked together and worked on multiple projects together, so this is like a poker room for us. We're all like, played cards, we could talk about whatever.
Actually, we should create the
we should just
VR
get poker, right?
Just do that, yeah.
But
VR poker.
VR poker experience. But Fox has a lot of enthusiasm for things new. They've always been a very technologically minded studio, and blending story with technology has been a key to their success.
Yep.
So this is no different. And we are most definitely taking risks and trying to represent ourselves as really not giving anybody the impression that we're an expert at any of this. It's all so new that we're just part of the learning process, and we're putting time and energy and budget into creating things.
Yeah.
Rob is working on our current project. Felix worked on our last project. So.
I will say, that we're working with Fox, and really, Fox it's been impressive because they've taken a lot of risks, and as if coming from traditional filmmaking, you don't see that, especially when it's not monetized yet and all that. So my hat's off to them. But we're working on a 15-minute Martian experience.
Yeah, which sounds amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fun. First of all, the movie's amazing, and we look forward to you all seeing it. And then, as we start working on it very organically, Rob and I start talking, and the other team, some of them, Ted and David and the other guys are in the audience, we all start looking at each other and going, we're actually living the movie now. So we want people to see it and then literally go inside it, go further, which is, it's pretty fascinating.
And you both, I mean, you directed Maleficent, and so you both come from that background, so you know how to talk with those people. I'm curious, like Felix, you come more from documentary, cinema verite, and the opposite end of the spectrum. I'm curious, in your, because those are to a certain extent extending the movie worlds of big blockbuster films. Well, for you coming from doc film, what is it in VR that you feel like is different for you, and what is you have a very different approach to those things.
Well, I think the common thread is point of view, is trying to, whether you do documentary or fiction, especially when it comes to VR, I feel like it's really about, I mean, that's our process that we really believe in, is defining who's the viewer, not necessarily in the literal way. It can be done in a very poetic way, even abstract way, but it needs to start from the viewer. And for us, that's the essence of VR storytelling. It's like, how do you articulate the viewer's presence inside of the piece? And the story needs to grow from that, It doesn't mean that in the literal way, the viewer has to be a character. It's not necessarily that. But you need to have clarity, I think, conceptually in regards to what does the point of view represents inside of the story? And that made sense when we were doing like more documentary work and before, and it still makes a lot of sense now, and even more sense, I think, in virtual reality storytelling. So, yeah.
I thought you brought up something earlier, which was really interesting, that, and what I've found is that when you put yourself in that space, you feel like you're intruding. Especially when we get into, with real actors, you're going to feel like you're violating their space. And it's, so how do we've all been experimenting with ways to sort of hide or get back and feel, because we're so accustomed to looking at hiding behind a film screen. So it's an interesting problem that you touched on earlier.
Yeah, and a screen is a symbol for something that exists, while in VR it exists, like our brain thinks this is real.
We notice, and I'm sure a lot of you that work in the medium notice, that you remember it differently than something that you've seen in flat screen media. You actually feel like you were there, you experienced it, which is powerful, and there's certainly a different level of responsibility as to what you're creating when 2 days later, after someone sees your work and they'll call you and go, I had the craziest dream, except it wasn't a dream. I remembered this thing, and I remembered this activity, or these actors or these people, and it felt real to me. Their memory was real. So we're really, it's magic. We're tricking the brain in a way that flat screen media has not been able to do yet. It's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, it's very visceral. I mean, Chris, you've done a broad spectrum of experimentation with storytelling in different kinds of mediums before, in different kind of installations and all. Like, you feel like you've done it all, and now there's VR, where it seems like for the first time you're stuck with something.
Well, we'll see, right?
In a good way. I mean, I'm just curious, like, what is it in VR where you feel like you want to do multiple things with this and not just this one thing? But I guess that's the difference, that it's something where you can do multiple things in it, or what was the thing that kind of made you stop?
I mean, I am really interested in storytelling in synchronized water dance. So well, I'm working on that. That's my next project. I was always trying to figure out how to just get deeper inside of it and get closer to the truth of it. And all the early mediums that I was working in, there's a rectangle there, and you're looking at it from the other side of the rectangle, and it's sort of like, it was always a story about some people over there, and I wanted it to be a story about like some people right here. And the way that I got through the rectangle was building museum installations, and I did that for a while. But then I was frustrated with that because I couldn't scale those experiences, because you could only build it in one place or two places at a time, and they're really expensive. So that's what led me out to the next step of virtual reality, and that was a few years ago. And to me, it's obvious, and it's just we now have the technology, or the technology has come to a point where it is achievable at a consumer price point. and that's why we're all here today. But it's a medium that it's the obvious technological evolution of mediums, because all the previous mediums before it have had this translation that needed to go on from the medium to your emotion. Like, you read words on a page, you imagine what it is, you have an emotional reaction to it. Or if you go even farther back, you have guys around a fire, and the guys that speared the woolly mammoth are telling the rest of the tribe about that experience, and you had to hear the words and imagine what it was like, and sort of embody that yourself and feel those emotions. And this is the first technology that has actually made the leap to be where there's not a translation any longer. You are on the plains hunting the woolly mammoth with the hunters. And to me, it's like, that's the most exciting time I can imagine to be alive as a storyteller is right now.
And I mean, what you said with the installations you did before, I think the interesting thing is, as you said, those are limited to a certain place and a certain amount of people who can see it during that time.
Yeah.
While VR is an individual experience, but it can massively scale. And I don't think there's another medium which can be individual, but also scale that much. A movie is for masses. So that's really interesting. I want to bring Arthur into that discussion, because you basically, with starting Jaunt, apart from that, it's your, what did you say, your 6th startup? 7th startup? That is crazy. He was part of the people who started Java, if anyone, maybe I just show my age if I say that. But so you're more you have an interesting setup, because you created a company to do the camera hardware, but now you're also investing into people creating films with that camera to drive the development of the camera. How is that forth and back?
So we're really not a camera company. We're a content company. We started off with the idea that we would be very bad at doing games, so can we do entertainment in VR? And that's kind of what we said, well, okay, we need a camera. Let's build one. And we started maybe a little earlier than most, but we started experimenting with GoPros and machine vision cameras, and we started building stuff. And then I saw the work that Chris had done, and I realized that it's all been done before. And, but we evolved, we learned a lot. We learned a lot about what works and what doesn't work. And we realized fairly early on that we needed to build a camera specifically designed for VR. And we did that in the first year of the company, and it was a complete failure. We used the wrong sensor and the wrong ISP and the wrong lens, and it was basically just a GoPro, but a little smaller. And we then took a step back, and we hired a proper hardware design team and built a proper camera that we were showing here at the show, the Jaunt 1. And that camera is actually, now you can really tell the difference. You really see it as it's a big step up. And it's not just in terms of image quality, but also in terms of ease of use. With GoPros, you're always worried that one of them is not recording, or you're always worried about sort of the image quality in low light situations. And this thing is sort of much more robust. And with that, we hope that we can scale up production significantly. Right, so we think there's lots of sort of high-end production that you can do, narrative and beautiful performance pieces and with real talent. But there's also a lot of sort of travel and documentary and news and general interest footage that can be done that needs to be very cheap to produce. If everything requires you to build a camera and figure out the stitching software and do this and that and the other, then it's never going to happen. So we're trying to make it as easy as possible to create a lot of content. And then we're also making it as easy as possible to distribute that content as widely as possible. So the end goal for us is to be, like a lot of people here, to be like Netflix for VR, right? To have a ton of content that is very compelling that people are willing to pay for.
Which is interesting, because to a certain extent, I think what we do as Story Studio, what any of you guys do, you want to create a story, and the technology doesn't exist. So it forces you to do these things. It forces you to create tools or kind of rewrite software or create hardware, all in the purpose of being able to do VR. So it's an interesting split of those two things, and hopefully the hardware and the software will kind of wrap around what the artist wants. I find it interesting that there's an interesting separation on the stage, because most of this side is mostly in shooting with camera live action, and most of this side is mostly in game engine real time. I don't know if that naturally happened or not, but
We stick together.
the interesting things, and funnily, Ikrima, you sit in the middle, and you do real time stuff where you shoot actors as well and incorporate them in it.
It was all planned, the layout.
So I was wondering about that because there's very few people out there who do that, who actually have element actors that are shot on a stage or wherever you shoot them, and then you integrate it into a real-time positional VR environment. I was curious, did that also come from creatively wanted to do that, or where does that mashup come from?
It came from definitely a creative or a technical constraint. I think humans, you relate to humans and human characters more than anything else, but doing full CG humans is really expensive. I think it came out of, if I'm remembering correctly, we were in the middle of one of our kind of personal pieces, and Corey had mentioned that this technique of doing the left eye, right eye, shooting on a plate and incorporating it and putting it in the game engine would work. And of course, I was like, no, there's no way. The math doesn't work up at all. And especially as you move, there's going to be a lot of skating. So I thought the thing would break. And as usual in VR, your intuition is like completely wrong. And Corey put up a demo of a CG character, and it worked surprisingly well. And that was kind of the dawn of us being able to use that technique and knowing where it falls apart, and the key things that make it not work, allowed us to now creatively work around it. So, for Insurgent, you're strapped to a chair. So when you're opposite Kate Winslet, you can't really move that far around her. And this amount of positional tracking, and she's far enough to where you don't really notice it, and people are like, "Oh, there's this CG character in front of you, or this live-action character in front of you. How did you do that? Is it like photogrammetry?" And it ended up being just a really simple and clever cheat.
Shaping your creative around the technology limits.
Yeah, I think
and
that's
pushing the technology equally.
That's kind of has been our approach. Is that there's a lot of times where there's a very difficult technical problem, but there's an easy creative solution, and sometimes there's a very difficult creative problem, but there's a really easy technical solution. And I think just that attitude of having everyone that we work with, everyone, me and Corey, the two of us, just be very well versed in the full range of everything that goes into VR has kind of helped tremendously.
And your rise is pretty amazing because, was it a year ago when you did Peso? How long ago was that?
Yeah, it does feel like ages ago.
And you just had a normal music video you'd done, and then you decided to do it in a VR version, or am I having that wrong?
No, that's right. Corey had worked on this mini opera music video. It's this wonderful, beautiful thing on and off for 4 years. And it happened to be he was finally finishing it up, right around the time we had some downtime. And I think his girlfriend suggested that, hey, wouldn't it be cool to do a VR thing? Because after 4 years of working on something, the thing you want to do most is continue working on it for 3 months. So all of it was pretty much done. And then we went through the process of okay, how do we make a VR version of that? And then it became pretty well liked.
And that was a year ago, and suddenly all the studios knock on your door and want you to do Insurgent and something for the View and all these things within a year from nothing. So I think just the reason why I picked on this is I think the beautiful thing of where we are right now is you can do something by yourself and make something really great, and everyone notices because there are just a handful of people there.
That's true.
But I want to Ted, you talked about, how was that thing called you do with Maze Runner?
Escape.
the multiple screen
immersive
things.
cinema, yeah.
And I think I saw an interview with you where you talked about the difference of a communal experience, because that's still communal, and an experience at home, which is a very different kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I was curious how that influences the stories, or are we changing the way we think about what kind of experience would be a communal experience and what kind of experience would be an at-home experience?
I think the answer is absolutely yes. Like what we're doing in our laboratory environments is we take this very broad view of what we call immersive media. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a HMD, something you strap on your head. If you can go into the theme park world, which I'm sort of a victim and a child of the world of theme parks, which probably is very formative in my desire to keep pushing these kind of envelopes, as I presume yours background as well, from Pixar and all the other things. We look at the world of, and Chris and I talk about this a lot, we refer back and forth to each other of how do you break out of the rectangle? Well, an HMD is a very, very effective way to break out of the rectangle and give us this freedom to look around, and now the technology is starting to make that viable. And we're doing the same thing in bricks and mortar while we're taking the cinema and saying, can we expand it? And it's interesting, the timing is very interesting because it's also in its very early experimental stages. We've only done 2 movies in the format, the first 2 Maze Runner movies. There's others queued up. Fox has a multi-picture deal cooking, and Bruckheimer's working on some stuff, and there's some big movies, but we're also exploring some really small indie movies that will stress the limits of all this. So we think that the head-mounted display world is literally just one piece of a very big puzzle of allowing technology to apply to storytelling. And I think it's interesting, and I sort of think about this a lot, that because you touched on it a number of times, we're really in kind of this, the art of true magic in the days when magicians often build their own shit because they want to achieve an objective and it doesn't exist, so they make it. They bailing wire it, and sometimes they hurt themselves and others until the point where they get it right. And we often refer to VR making people nauseous in the early days, but everybody was just sort of building it to get it to the point where it's right enough to make sense. And that, like when Akrim is talking about his early experiments with camera rigs, well, that didn't exist. Arthur's busy building cameras because that didn't exist, and no one really knows is it right or wrong, you just do it. And for us, we sort of are doing that within a big movie studio, which is probably sort of odd that the movie studio is so supportive of such an endeavor like this. But I think the time is right to make sure that they don't miss something that could be so big and so important that if they don't pay attention to this, they could blow it all.
I think that's a lot of the things is kind of, they don't really understand what it is, but they know if they don't pay attention and stay ahead of it, they might just lose out and become dinosaurs.
Yeah. And the other thing that's really important, Rob and I talk about this a lot in our current project, is that we are very, very bullish on this medium, on the medium of immersion, in whatever form you might take, is that we don't just see it as a marketing tool or a promotional tool. We see it as a new way to visualize entertainment that is potentially much more powerful than anything that's come before it. So I often sort of give the equation of, I feel like we're in the days when there's black and white and then there was color. In the early days of color, the color was really weird and it was odd, and people in the mainstream and the status quo were like, well, that's an interesting experiment, but that's never going to replace like black and white movies and television. That's the order of the day. And now, of course, everything changed. Well, I think that we're on the stage of another everything change moment where we're going to look back at these kind of environments, these traditional environments like one sitting behind me, and it will feel very old and primitive and not what people actually want anymore, because we can give them more, so why don't we try?
But I hope that they coexist. I hope that nothing dies out. But I'm curious, Chris, you started with Verse with mostly your own piece that was fully CG. But then you started working with other directors and other people, and I'm curious, you probably, because of that, have done nearly the most amount of projects, at least that are released. I'm still waiting for Felix and Paul's things to all be released because it's cut a lot. But I'm curious if there's a new project, do you try to push it forward in a certain direction? Is there something that you found that works really well, and that you try in new projects to have them explore that more, or share all your knowledge?
I mean, we're at the stage where we're willing to try anything. once, or actually more than once. The first piece that I did, the evolution of perspective, is actually the first thing I did was the Beck experience, which was live action, and then I wanted to do something in the evolution of verse piece where we're sort of like utilizing the full muscle and power of a Hollywood post-production visual effects house. Because if you're going to do pre-rendered, I mean, if it's going to be a pre-rendered sequence of spherical video that you're watching, it doesn't just have to be captured with a camera. So that was very quickly, I wanted to try to experiment with the other tools that I worked with as a filmmaker in the Rectangle. But no, we're open to anything. We're working in horror, we're working in music, we're working in comedy, we're working in news. We have a partnership with Vice, we have a partnership with New York Times. We're doing stuff with the United Nations, documentary stuff. We're working on fiction stuff now. So I don't think there's one specific thing it works for. And to sort of expand on something that Ted was saying, like, what I think is really interesting is if you look at the physical tools of early cinema, where you have this box and black and white film, and there was a crank, and they were making, you know, the train coming into the station that you showed, and they had no idea what the format of a feature film was to be, and as you said, it took a long time for them to figure that out, and we talk about how we're at that stage as well. But what I've been thinking about is, if you look at where we are now, if you took an adult drama of modern day cinema, you could still tell that story with those early tools. You'd have to have subtitles and you'd have a guy playing piano, but you could still tell the same feature film story format with that tool. And I think what's really interesting about VR is if you scale it out to 100 years from now, what that would look like, you'd never be able to tell the kind of stories that you'll be telling in 100 years in VR with the tools that we have now, which means that the tools have to fundamentally evolve with the storytelling that we discover. So there's a lot of, and all of us here all of us have like built cameras and built editing systems and built distribution software. And I mean, it's very much like you said, like stringing stuff together. But it kind of needs to be that because the creative is going to drive the technological evolution a lot. I mean, it has to, because it's not just a matter of having this sort of linear 24 frames per second rectangles that get projected. It's going to change. It's going to evolve.
It's a funny forth and back play because the tech of VR happened, and then we all saw VR. And then we kind of trying to push against it with the creative stuff we're trying to do now. So there was a bit of tech first, and then we kind of trying to take it over now and pushing the tech further.
That's actually what happened with from analog to digital. I remember it was the same thing. When computers first arrived, there were a lot of tech people making creative projects. But it wasn't until sort of creative people joined into that you started to see amazing things. And I remember computers back then being so damn slow, and within 10 years, you were able to then do stuff. So I see the same thing. It's exactly the same thing here.
And now we talk about 11 millisecond render worlds.
Yeah.
A couple years ago, you did, excuse me? You want to do what exactly? And now we're pushing so hard. That's what's so interesting. It's such a vibrant time because there's so many people converging on tech and story, right? And believing that there's something that can come out of it. So they push really hard.
It is a force of will.
Yeah.
I mean, by pure will, we kind of force the technology to change.
Yeah.
I mean, Felix, your camera started out as you wanted to shoot more interesting stereo documentary, right? And you were frustrated with how the cameras didn't allow you what they were able to do?
Yeah, I think that, for us at the beginning, like when we were doing more like documentary work, it was really about, creating 3D stereoscopic installation that was before virtual reality, that were about creating a sense of intimacy between the viewer and the subject. And we were trying to use stereoscopy as a way to bring more of a sense of what we started calling at the time presence, for the lack of a better word. And we were not satisfied with that because you would still be in your physical world watching a window opened onto another world. And so we could feel a sense of that, what we like to call sometimes relational quality between you and the subject matter, but it was not as powerful. It was not as real as we wanted. And when we started doing virtual reality work, immediately it was about creating a technology that would empower us to reach that full level of intimacy that we were going for. And so the first ever experience that we created was called Strangers with Patrick Watson. The purpose of that experience was really to explore how we can create a sense of direct human connection between viewer and subject. And how does that feel like, you know, and how can we nurture it? And so it was a single shot. It was like a one moment that we designed to be just about that, you know. And so the camera technology we wanted to use needed to be as seamless as possible because we didn't want any sense of filter or resistance towards you and that experience because we stripped it down to the minimum. It's just you and a guy in a room, and we intentionally wanted it stripped down like that to really get to the essence of the feeling, right? And so we worked very, very hard on that first project to get as close as we could be to a technology that felt seamless from a capture standpoint. Just because, but again, it was about the creative, it was about the emotion we were going for, and that was the driver for doing all of that work on the technological side, you know, to get to that emotion, to get to that feeling, basically. And it's still the same today. Everything we do, like the project we did with Wild the Experience that we did with Fox Searchlight, we didn't started talking to the guy saying, hey, this needs to be an interactive experience. You know, we used interactivity because we had a story to tell that would work better through interactivity. And so we had to figure out a way to tell a story that could branch differently because we felt that that was the way to do it. So we, you know, had to figure out the programming. We had to figure out like what we could do from the technological standpoint to tell the story that we wanted to tell and communicate the feeling we wanted to communicate. So.
And it's interesting with Strangers because it's such a, going to what you said with the communal thing, Strangers would never work as a communal experience. It would be weird if you would sit in someone's apartment with 100 people.
Yeah.
It is uniquely an individual thing.
Yeah, because you're voyeuristic. You're peering into.
You want to be there as a singular person.
Yeah, and it belongs. It feels like it belongs to you. It feels like it's your moment, you know,
Yeah.
somehow. And that's what people say about. And I'm sure you guys have heard that, but that's what I think somehow I like the most about the reaction I get from people in regards to VR content is they feel like it belongs to them. It's their own experience. It's something that they have lived, you know, and it stays with you in that way. And I like that a lot.
Yeah. I mean, questions about the future are always hard because I feel like we all, to a certain extent, agree that we have no freaking idea what the future holds. But I'm curious about the merging of positional VR and recorded VR. So Arthur, I'm curious if you're thinking about this, if you feel like now we're still in this chapter for a while, let's explore this, let's move forward, or what are your thoughts on that?
So I think that AR is going to drive that decision, you know, because you're going to want to be able to walk around an experience or to look around in an experience. You know, we're not directly addressing that today because we're focusing on the things that are possible today. We want to make VR successful first before we go and solve the problems that don't exist yet. So we want to create millions of viewers, not hundreds of thousands of viewers. But I do think that, you know, volumetric video or light field, you know, rendering, those kinds of things are really exciting and interesting. And, you know, we just raised a bunch more money, and I'm hoping to now hire a bunch of smart people to go and do these advanced projects for me and with me, because I think that's one of the more exciting things about the VR is that it's moving so quickly, and if you're not innovating, you will be left behind. So we intend to innovate, yes, but we also intend to focus on the here and now.
I'm extremely polarized in terms of the need and desire of what we call volumetric capture or move around video, and I would imagine everybody here is. And because of my role at Fox, I get asked to sort of help a lot of companies, and you could probably tell by my nature, I like to evangelize and kick things up, and have been actually involved in a number of companies now. There's a company called ADI and a company called Hype VR. These are very small, young startup companies that are starting to experiment with the first touches of, can we, again, we talked about breaking out of the rectangle, can we break out of the sphere? Why is it when we're in live action video that if I want to look closer to Reese Witherspoon like we did in the project, I can't, I'm stuck in space. And I have this strong desire, especially because CG allows us to do that so elegantly and so effectively now, that we want that so bad. Kareem and I have talked, we've all talked about it. It's just the yearning is so strong once you get that far to say, we got to go further. And that's, again, another stress point. We have to push that technology as hard as we can to get to where CG and live action are literally the same tool set. And we can position actors and then look around them and walk around them and be with them.
I think, taking it a step, but also it will allow real actors to act.
Yeah.
And I don't think we truly have felt the emotion and the power that's there yet, because the technology is just not there. But I see very shortly a time where you are directing name actors and you're getting the real emotions that you want in any environment that you want. And I know we're all going to that place, but once that happens, I think it's going to truly be a game changer.
I guess the only remaining line between the two then will be interactivity, because that is something you will never be able to have if you shoot it. I mean, maybe if you would have a full CG actor, but then the question is,
anything
who
is
owns the
possible in the future.
Well, but it can also be out of context, right? I mean, let's say there's an actor doing a great performance and I go sit right next to him. Is that performance going to have the same emotion? Not if I'm in the wrong place, not if I stand behind him, not if... I think it has to become interactive, it has to become CG if you want to be able to move around, because otherwise you're going to affect the performance. It'd be stupid if the performance continues when you leave the room, right? I mean, it would break the performance. I mean, I think what's going to happen is you're going to capture the essence of the experience or the actor, and then render that out interactively.
It's an interesting thought, because I think that there's a lot of AI in games, but most of those characters look like they just behave very procedurally. There's no acting involved in it because it's all driven by code.
The nuances don't exist, yeah.
And when you just said that, I remembered an early quote that that came from during Beowulf from Robert Zemeckis, where he talked crazy about the future, and he talked about the mocap capturing the performance just in a different way, and then applying digital makeup. So if you ignore how technically it's not perfect yet, that is literally what it is. It's applying digital makeup versus practical makeup, if the technology would be perfect. And if you think about that, I found that interesting, because if that truly works, that you could capture someone's style of acting, but adapt it, then it's still the actor, then it's still that individual person's performance.
But it'll start with subtle things, right? Like the actor will face you as you move around because they're acting for you. Or if you step into the actor, they will step away. But those have to be, somewhat intelligent actions, because they can't step into a wall or over a chair.
But
how do you solve those things?
As a filmmaker, I think you want to be disciplined enough to know. I mean, you sit and watch a Broadway play that's live, but you're not on the stage. And you don't go on the stage, or it wouldn't be the same. So you have to be disciplined in where you place the camera and what you do with it. You can't get too close to an emotional scene because you'll feel like you're disrupting it. So I think it's really the choices that we make and that we're all trying to experiment with.
The fact that the user is the viewer is kind of constrained helps you in that sense, because you can box them in, right? If you can't box them in, then you have to think completely differently.
Chris, when I saw your work of Felix, your stuff, I was like, oh, I can't move around. That limits my choice as a viewer so much. That's actually kind of liberating as a storyteller. Because once you can move, it started to feel like, well, what is the etiquette of watching a VR experience? Should I stick my head into that hedgehog's character when he's really sad? I massively break kind of the mood of the scene, because that is kind of weird. So to a certain extent, I admire the limitation you use for it because it gives you a sense of control.
Yeah.
Go. I'm going to follow up.
All right. I mean, that is a choice that is made for us by the technical limitations of what we're working with right now. And I do think that it's sort of like the same idea, only scaled way out to the future of like right now it's just stereo VR, where if you want to, you can like turn your head and you can break the 3D of it. You can get it not to work if you try. And I think the sort of initial reaction of when you enter into a new medium that's so experiential that you do that you will walk up to actors' faces and get too close and mess up the emotion of the scene. But I think over time, like there's sort of an understanding and a language and it's like not just the language of the storytelling, but it's the language that the audience understands of their own presence and what it means and where they should be. Because ultimately, like what you're talking about is, if you have a scene that feels truly like real life, then your place in the scene is where you would stand in real life. Like in real life, you wouldn't walk up to the main character and stick your face in theirs. Keep a respectable, instinctual human distance. So I think there will have to be like an evolution of our own understanding of what the language is that evolves, where we understand our place in it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's totally.
I'll go.
Really quick, it's totally like you. There's an understanding of how to use technology. Use that as an example. Is that the UX and UI as an analogy? Is that what worked in 1970, 1980, and 1990 to today is very different, and that's because we have evolved into understanding what this symbol means, and so. As a participant, you understand the conventions, and I think the same thing's going to happen to VR, right? Like when we see the floppy disk icon, we all know that it means to save, although I'm pretty sure most teenagers have no idea
what a floppy disk anymore.
What that thing is, right? Same thing for a bunch of things, and I think the same thing's happening with VR is that conventions, filmmakers establish the conventions, the good ones rise to the top, and then that comes into the collective conscience of the audience, and then we can build on top of that and then change that.
I'm curious if Felix has a radically different view on this.
I have a lot of pressure now. No, I guess one thing I just wanted to add to that is that I think it's important to. We care a lot about the fact for us VR. It's not a 360 camera that we position in a space. It's not the way we think about it. Like we try to think about, okay, we're bringing a person inside of that scene. We're bringing a subjectivity inside of an environment. We're bringing a subjectivity with other characters, whether that's documentary or fiction. It's an actual person that we're placing in a scene. And we've realized that when we manage to do it right, to position the viewer where the viewer should be in relation to the story, in relation to the characters, the environment, then it feels right when you watch the experience. And the fact that you don't necessarily have positional tracking at this point is less frustrating because it feels that where you are inside the scene and the way you are interconnected with everything just feels right. So of course it would be better to have positional tracking, of course. But there are ways to tell stories in VR in a way that will not feel frustrating and will feel effortless if you position the viewer at the right place, in the right context. And so we believe in that, and that is part of working with the limitations that we have right now. But I also think that everyone here is probably working on positional tracking in one capacity or another. Once that is integrated to the medium, that will definitely become the standard, and there will be no looking back. That is very clear for me. But in the meantime, there's so much to do with the current tools that we have. So much to explore and figure out from a storytelling standpoint that we don't get too distracted by that, and we, exactly.
I think there's something interesting. What he's talking about is composition in virtual reality, which was, it seemed like a foreign concept at the beginning, because when we started, it's like, okay, well, there's compositions out the window. There's no longer a rectangle that you put people inside of the frame. And certainly the first things we made, we didn't know what we were doing, and it did feel like composition was out the window. But as we started continuing making stuff, we realized that it's not a composition of frame, it's a composition of presence. And you can really, there is a place that you can put someone in a scene, and where they find themselves in relation to their surroundings, and where they find themselves in relation to the choreography of the humans around them is incredibly important. And sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't work. But it's a real thing.
To composition, because it reminded me of when we were making Avatar, and we were making 360-degree environments, and my job at the time was how do you compose in that? Because when Jim would take the camera and move around in that 360 world, it all had to sort of feel right. And so what I did is, and I was sort of thinking about it on your piece, take it and moving around in sections and making good compositions in that 360 world, so no matter where you looked, it looked good. If you started down a direction, you would move out of one composition and into another nice one. So I mean, there are ways to make compositions in 360. And I was thinking about that with yours, because I was looking around the room, and you have everything spaced in a comfortable way. Mm-hmm. So that when you do look, there's nothing that's bunched together. And so you can compose and art direct and production design in 360.
What we find from a studio perspective, it's interesting that you guys are all talking about this, because you're included in this group, is there's a sense of craftsmanship that a lot of people, because they're just emerging into the technology, don't grasp that yet. Interestingly enough, you've picked quite a number of people on the panel that have bona fide hits in VR. Like in the early days, what would you call a hit? Strangers is a hit. Like people talked about it. Akrima's train station piece is a hit. What's it called? The train station with the guy in the underwear and the. But it's a hit.
That is what you remember, the guy in the underwear.
It's amazing, and it's a hit. And Chris with the Beck piece, and then the verse, the evolution. I would call them actually hit pieces. They've entered our consciousness. We talk about them in parties and bars and stuff, because it's not just they use technology well, it's that they've thought, and your pieces are hits, because you craft them. You put time and energy, and that's from a movie studio standpoint. We're already actually now seeing, interestingly enough, even though the industry as it is so young, we're starting to see kind of a glut of people that want to get into it and want to figure out a way to earn money at it, become, have a career in it. And you start to have to find, sort of separate the wheat from the chaff, right? And you start looking for those cues that will say, these are guys that are crafting something. And it's the rarest of all beasts, right? Stuff that is really, really good in a new medium. And we're hoping that I can tell you, because we're in it every day, Rob's crafting this thing. Yeah. It's not like he's spending 5 minutes on it every day. He's spending every waking hour on all the nuances that will make it not just good, but great. And all these guys have done it as well. I'm a witness to it, which is fantastic.
For me, whether we've all done something, I still feel this is just like so early.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody's really done the thing yet.
It's the thing is to, I don't know how you guys feel, but I always feel like when people watch something I made, or when people watch something you made, and then people only talk about the potential, and you're like, yeah, but look at all the work. You think this is crap, but the potential of it. It's
very true. Yeah. Never thought about it.
I wish I could reach out. It's something we at the studio talked a lot about, that a lot of the press, or especially to the outside, it's talk about what it could bring, and we wish there would be just reviews for what it is.
But at the same time, they're right. I mean, it's true that when
yes.
Sadly, they're right, because it's such a young art form. It's all about potential. Like we can do great things right now, but everything we've been talking about is potential of this, potential of that. Like I think they're right. I think that it's a little sad when you work like a very long time on something and you show it and it's like, it's an interesting demo. Like that's the word that I exhausted to. It's not a demo. It's like 6 months of my life. It's not. You see what I mean? So that part I find rough sometimes, but at the same time, I do, when I look at it from afar, I think they're right. I think we're talking about the birth of an art form, you know, and any art form, you know, think about like painting, when it became over the centuries, or cinema, which is a younger art form, but it's still very diverse and very rich, and some people bring it into experimental zones, and some people bring it into like super commercial, high entertainment, high production value. It has a range. Each, like music is the same, each art form has a range, and VR is just this little burgeoning, I don't even know if that's a word in English, but anyway.
It is.
It's, okay, thank you. It's growing, right? And it's growing, and people who play in that world, who do projects in that world, I think feel it. You know, they feel it because they're part of that growth, and people looking at it from the outside also witness that, you know, and they comment on it. So
That's good, though.
What we all see, though, is
That's,
the power of what it could be.
Yeah, no, totally.
exactly.
That frustrating
we're here.
power of what it could be, what we haven't. I think for me, it reminds me of a good friend of mine in Germany. She is a biologist. And I visited her once in the university where she was doing work. And she, day in and day out, had these seeds. And then she had some chemical stuff. And then she combined them. And then she watched them for like months and to figure out if something happens. And possibly the chances are 99.9% nothing happens. But there's millions of other biologists around the world who do different kind of experiment, and one of them will succeed. And I thought, oh, I'm glad I don't have her job. And now I feel like we have this job that we all kind of, we throw rocks at something, we hope to hit something, and maybe someone else hits something, but it's the accumulation, I think, of all what we do together. Like now just being able, if you compare it to a year ago, you can watch all these things and you can learn from them. You can see, oh, this didn't work, this did work.
Well,
the
but
only
then-
way that
then it's
happens is
different.
communal.
Then it's different, right? Because I think every experiment we do, you learn something,
Right.
which is not true with your biologist friend.
Thank
just
you.
learn a negative. You learn positives here.
Yeah, that's true.
No, I'm German negative painting. But that's why things like that, what you're doing, Arthur, is great, because you, and Chris, you do the same with the directors you bring in, is that you spread it out, that more and more people can do something and someone can come at it from a different angle and from a different angle. Do you have, like, what's your, Chris, you know most of the people you work with? I'm curious about both of your processes of who do you work with next, how do you kind of figure that out? Maybe Chris, you first, and then Arthur, you can talk about it.
So we have a production company called VerseWorks, and we have a collection of directors. Who's one of them?
We are.
Me and Corey.
Yeah. And the first idea was I wanted to get the smartest, most creative people that I knew or knew of and try to get them together as almost like a collective to try to tackle this big, gigantic question mark at the horizon. And we've had projects come in that we sort of bring to some of those directors, and some of those directors have their own things that we've developed internally. And now we're starting to open it up to other directors as well. But there's very much a sense of sharing and community, and I mean, ultimately we want to start sharing everything that we're learning with a global audience, and that's something that we'd like to do in the long term. Right now, it's a lot of like conversations in different people's offices and hallways and water coolers and such.
Arthur, how do you decide?
So I'm not on the creative side, I'm on the technology side, but we have a studio in LA where Cliff Plumer is heading that up. He's the guy that is really in charge of that particular aspect of who to work with. But I think it's sort of conceptually, I think we're looking for people who are interested in VR, obviously, and who are innovative thinkers and are willing to take on a new challenge and really sort of think a little bit outside the box, right? Because just doing what everybody else is doing is not interesting. It's really trying to do the things that nobody is doing that are interesting.
We have a bit of time left. I want to open it to Q&A. The only requirement for Q&A is you do not ask a question where every single panelist has to answer. You need to point it at a specific person.
Hi there, Greg Panos. I think one of the most compelling things about VR is the proper use of stereoscopy. I've been involved with stereophotography, just as a hobby for years, and sitting people down and showing them a proper stereoscopic display of just regular photographs is almost always a transformative experience. People are always asking me, why is this not a thing? And I went to see a demo earlier today, and it was one of the interactive demos, but I noticed how much engagement I had because of the stereoscopy. Now, I know there are a lot of challenges in filming live action properly or in a manner where you can acquire material that you can work with stereoscopically. And it's a little easier when everything's in 3D and you can make adjustments and the like. But what are your thoughts on knowing about stereoscopy, using it in traditional photography, understanding the rules and the way the neurological systems respond for humans with stereoscopic material, and how that helps you as developers and filmmakers that are exploring the VR medium?
I think, Ted, you're the closest to that.
Me?
Yes.
Yeah, who is the question to?
Point someone.
You can pick. Saschka, but I don't have to answer it. But
Chris, for instance.
I'm
I'll answer a little.
we could both.
Well, no, I mean, if someone wants to pick,
Ted.
I believe,
I think it's incredibly important. You can explain it better.
Yeah, well, I'll start and then.
It's incredibly important because being immersed in one of these environments, you feel the sense, there's sort of primal instincts, that depth cues and all that stuff that unless all those are working, your brain doesn't get it right. Things can look out of scale or something. So it's really important to complete the immersion process.
Yeah, my thinking on it is because you have a device that's literally mapping to your eyes, and your eyes are a stereoscopic device, unless you've lost one of them. Most of us have two working eyes, so we have stereo. That the art form essentially demands stereo and wants stereo. And right now, we're still in that early stage of sometimes we have to make a technology trade-off where resolution trumps stereo. And sometimes you can actually fool your brain into believing it's stereo in a Gear VR when it's not. So it's a complex question. But removing all of that, putting yourself in a vacuum, stereo is an absolute requirement for the medium to succeed. Caveat is I see plenty of things that aren't actually stereo that still succeed because our brains are pretty malleable devices and we can trick and we can make a choice that sometimes resolution needs to trump pure stereo, which is interesting. I'm sure you guys would all agree.
Well, I mean, we're also trained to look at reality with depth. Like from the day you're born, you grow up and you perceive depth. That's how you perceive reality. And so when you look at a flat image, you know that that is a representation of reality. That's a picture of reality, but there's a sense of distanciation. So even if it's not VR and it's just a stereoscopic display, your mind responds to it as something that is closer to the actual experience of reality. And therefore, your brain response is different.
I'll go back farther than that. I think instinctually, that thing over there, we want to know if it's going to kill us or not. So we have to know how far.
Fight or flight, yeah.
So it's all built into our.
But to be really truly honest, the stereo that we have today, even in CG, is not correct, right? I mean, you don't have convergence distance. If I look at something far away, the stereo needs to change because my eyes are moving, and that would require eye tracking, and that's kind of maybe the next big thing. But there's other aspects too that add to realism, like high dynamic range. The dynamic range of screens is terrible compared to real life. So to get realism, there's lots of dimensions we can go into to get better realism.
And theoretically, with the resolution limits we have right now, you could say like, oh, you have 20 pixels width to define depth between this close and 100 meters away. That depth resolution is ridiculous.
Yep.
So essentially what we're saying is the tools basically suck right now.
Yeah.
They'll get better eventually, but we're not there yet.
Thank you. Very interesting answers.
Hello, I'm a 3D filmmaker, but coming from documentary mostly, and I have a question for Felix, because obviously a lot of your work is coming from documentary as well. So how much does the 3D help into the documentary experience in particular?
Well, it helps a lot because it makes you feel things completely differently. I think that, a lot of what we're aiming to do is for the viewer to surrender, to accept the environment and the characters as the new reality, right? It's to forget about the physical reality you were in and to sort of let yourself go in that new reality that we're proposing through the VR experience. And getting 3D, getting depth, tremendously helps with that. It's a bit like what we were saying. It's it just makes you accept that as reality instead of as a picture of reality. And it's a big difference, and you don't have the same anticipation for time. If it's just a picture of reality, you will anticipate a cut. You will anticipate that something happens that ties to the cinematic language, I think. But once you're in a full stereoscopic experience and that everything feels right and is properly balanced and everything, then your mind can stay there longer also. So it kind of affects rhythm. It affects a lot of things inside of your brain, I think. And so I agree with what Ted said. I think it's whether you do fiction or VR, for me at least, 3D stereoscopy is absolutely fundamental to get the proper state of presence that we're generally going for, I think.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Aitor. I'm the founder of Massive Square. Basically, we are a VR biologist, as your friend, you know, probably touching everything since from game to live action and everything. And I want to bring two questions to the table. Basically, the first one is, what do you think about long exposure for the people when you go into the mainstream, you know, and everybody gonna watch a movie through a virtual reality device for a 60 or 90 minutes. What's your thoughts about that? Do you think that they're going to be able to be this time having this experience?
Well, I've done it. I watch movies, full movies on airplanes all the time, and was, I don't know if I'd say a driving force, but certainly a big protagonist in what we did with Fox, which is we're going to actually put big commercial movie titles into VR. Now there's 100+ that will come out in the next week or so, couple weeks. And I wear my Gear VR many hours a day, and then my other DK1s, DK2s, Crescent Bays, Vives, everything. I'm in VR sometimes 6-8 hours a day, and so far I'm surviving.
I think
You seem totally normal.
Whatever.
Of course, the content has to be compelling, you know, to want to be there, you know, keep your interest. The other thing is, you know, perhaps reinstating the intermission might work.
The 20-minute break, yeah.
And the quick question, a big question is, what are the viewing habits of people once it's actually out there? When TV shows came about, the writing changed, the length changed. Like, this is a certain period that works because of the commercials are in between. Writing changed so that you don't have to listen to every single word. You understand later on, like, oh, this is happening. Films you watch on your phone, well, maybe internet phone stuff started becoming like a 2-3 minute length. Everything afterwards, people stop watching. So I think once VR is out there and it's in people's homes, the way people adopt it into their everyday life is going to dictate a bit what the right format and length is for a VR experience.
Mm-hmm. All right. The other quick question for just you, Ted, is basically if tomorrow you receive the request from your boss, you know, you're going to have the $1 million for the next feature for a virtual reality thing. Which going to be your recommendation for starting the project? Wow. Just in one thing. First person.
I'm not allowed. My boss is right there.
First person experience or third person experience? Which one in terms of storytelling do you think?
Well, okay, so I obviously won't be able to answer that question directly, or else this is my last day at 20th Century Fox. Well, here's what I'll tell you, which I think might be valuable from an audience standpoint. From a studio perspective, from what we're working on, we are looking at all of our big tentpole IP, of which we have 100+ years, and we're pulling things that we believe will extend the story and bring life to old stories and new stories and current stories. That's one half of the answer. The other half is we're actively exploring new ideas, new artists, new visions, like people on the stage here, that are thinking about new things specifically for a new medium. Because we believe for the medium to really take off, you can pull things from the past, but you also have to pull things from the future. And you have to give young, untrained, unestablished artists with radical thoughts and new ways to take a medium and really blow it out their chance. So I think, and many others I think also agree, that a new medium gives new opportunities for new artists, and we are actively cultivating that, simultaneously to cultivating this vast treasure trove.
but
Is that okay? All right? Yeah, all right, there you go.
And
But at
it's
this
gonna be
moment-
interesting once there's a new generation growing up where VR is more natural.
Yes.
For all of us, we have to forget film, we have
Correct.
to forget all that stuff.
Right.
And once there's a generation,
But it's
like, no,
important to
this is
use
normal.
it. I mean, we talk about theater a ton because we talk about the tricks and the trickery of theater to direct people's attention. There are a lot of VR creators that are really worried about how do I keep them engaged in my story, and we think about how do you keep people engaged in theater. You use lighting and magic and things and sound and stuff, which we do now. But with that being said, for a medium to really take off in the future, you have to explore what the possibilities of that are.
Just have to have a compelling
Agency and the idea of like, I can do things in this medium that I can't do if I'm sitting in a movie, which we didn't even talk on. That's probably a whole nother hour you could talk on.
Yeah.
You know, this new medium, does it demand agency? Does it tell us that just passive storytelling won't cut it anymore, that we need to actually build something beyond that, which I know you're experimenting with, we're experimenting with, we're actively experimenting with it, learning.
all right. Thank you so much.
A lot of more people lined up.
Hello, my name's Dylan. I'm with Monster VR, and apparently I'm the last question. Yeah. So my question is this: we do VR events and training, and early December we're going to be doing a 3-day workshop teaching people how to go from nothing to 360 videos. What are some of the common pitfalls and rabbit holes you see people getting started in 360 video content tend to fall into, and how to avoid those?
Whoa.
Who's the question to? Probably should be Felix.
Felix.
Felix is a good one.
Ask,
Yeah.
like Arthur, Felix, Chris. I think that whole side is experienced.
You can have this one.
Potential pitfalls. I mean, you mean 360 video or you mean VR? Because for me, these are two different things.
Okay, listen, VR.
VR? Well, for me, and it's a personal advice, is don't think of your camera as a camera, basically. Think of your camera as a person and try to take it from there. Try to think of your story from that. And it's quite a complex question to figure out, and the answer is never the same from project to project. But I would say that, because if you think of it as a 360 camera, then you start to try to make a traditional film, and you start to retrofit everything that you learn as a filmmaker into VR, and then you're not going to be happy with the result. And you're going to think, why doesn't that work? It works so well in film. Why is it that it doesn't work now in virtual reality? And so I feel like if you start integrating that new dimension, it's not just the third dimension visually, but it's also dramatically. There's a viewer inside of your world, and what does that mean for your story? I think that changes the perception of what you're doing, you know, as a storyteller.
Got it. All right. Thank you.
Was that it? I thought those people on the right were lined up, but it doesn't look like it. I think we're also over, so we might just wrap it with this. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you. Good stuff.